Long ago, there lived a king whose courage was once spoken of across every village in the land. His people trusted him. His soldiers followed him without fear, and when his banner appeared on the battlefield, even his enemies marched with caution. But no victory lasts forever. The first battle was lost. The king told his soldiers, "We will learn from this." Then the second battle was lost. "We will return stronger," he said. Then came the third, and the fourth. With every defeat, hope quietly left the hearts of his people. One evening, after another crushing loss, the king stood alone on a hill overlooking the battlefield. Broken shields lay scattered across the ground. The wind carried the torn remains of his royal banner through the grass. In the distance, the last of his soldiers slowly walked away. One young soldier stopped and looked back. Tears filled his eyes. "Forgive us, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "We no longer know how to win." The king wanted to answer, but no words came. For the first time in his life, he wondered if they were right. Perhaps he had already fought his final battle. Rain began to fall. Heavy clouds swallowed the evening sky. The king wandered through the hills until he found an old stone cottage standing alone beneath the mountains. Inside, the fire had long since turned to cold ash. Rain slipped through cracks in the roof and landed softly upon the dusty floor. The little cottage felt forgotten, as though even time had stopped visiting it. The king sat beside the empty fireplace and laid his sword on the ground. He stared at its worn blade. "This sword has followed me through every battle," he sighed, "and still I have lost." Morning arrived quietly. A single beam of sunlight slipped through a crack in the roof. The king lifted his eyes. Near the highest corner of the cottage, a tiny spider stretched a delicate thread toward an old wooden beam. The distance was small, yet the climb was steep. The spider moved carefully, slowly, patiently. Just before reaching the beam, its thread snapped. The little creature swung helplessly through the air before landing back where it had begun. The king watched for a moment, then looked away. "It is finished," he whispered. But when he looked again, the spider had already begun another climb. The king began counting without realizing it. 3. The second attempt ended the same way. Then the third. Each time the thread broke. Each time the spider fell. He leaned back against the wall. "Surely now you'll stop." The spider climbed again. 4. Another fall. 5. The king shook his head. "You don't know when to quit." Yet the tiny creature never argued with failure. It never looked toward an easier wall. It never remained where it had fallen. It simply began again. The king found himself watching more closely than before. Not because it was a spider, but because its struggle had quietly become his own. The sixth climb lasted longer than all the others. The spider reached higher than ever before. Only a few tiny steps remained. The king leaned forward. "This is it." Then a cold gust of wind swept through the broken roof. The thread snapped. The spider fell all the way back to the stone wall. The king closed his eyes. "So close," he whispered. "No one would blame you for stopping now." For a long moment, the spider remained perfectly still. The king lowered his head. He knew that silence. It was the silence after defeat. The silence that whispers, "You've tried enough." The silence that convinces us another attempt will only bring another failure. The king sighed. "I understand." Then something caught his eye. The spider moved. Not quickly, not dramatically. It simply turned toward the beam once more and began climbing again. The king watched in complete silence. He realized something that had never crossed his mind before. The spider was not climbing because it knew it would succeed. It climbed because climbing was the only way forward. The seventh climb looked no different from the others. There was no secret path, no sudden burst of strength, only one careful step, then another. The spider reached the place where it had fallen before. It paused for only a heartbeat, then continued upward. Another step, another. At last, its tiny legs touched the wooden beam. The thread held firm. The spider disappeared into the corner of the roof and quietly began weaving its web. The king never took his eyes from that little corner. A gentle smile appeared upon his face, not because the spider had finally reached the beam, but because he finally understood what courage truly looked like. Courage was not winning every battle. Courage was refusing to let yesterday's failure decide today's effort. He looked down at the sword lying beside him. For a long while, he simply stared at it. Then he picked it up, walked to the cottage door, stopped, looked back at the little spider one last time, and whispered, "One more time." The king returned to his people. He did not promise an easy victory. He did not promise that no one would fall. He promised only this: as long as we still have the strength to rise, our story is not over. Some soldiers still refused. They had lost too much. But one old blacksmith opened his workshop again. "If you will fight once more," he said, "I will forge one more sword."
A farmer brought sacks of grain. "I cannot fight," he smiled, "but hungry soldiers cannot win." A shepherd offered to guide the army through hidden mountain paths.
Little by little, hope returned, not all at once. Just as the spider had climbed, one step, then another. Months later, the king led his people into battle again. This time, they stood together. And before the sun had set, the kingdom was free once more. Years passed. The king ruled wisely and in peace. One autumn afternoon, a young boy asked him, "Your Majesty, who was the greatest teacher you ever had?" The old king smiled. He did not point toward a palace or a battlefield. Instead, he looked toward the distant mountains. "There was once a tiny spider," he said, "who never knew it was teaching a king." Most people believe courage means never falling. But no one lives without failure. No one walks through life without disappointment. The real question is not whether we will fall. The real question is what we do after we fall. Failure has a quiet voice. It tells us that another attempt will end exactly like the last. Hope has an even quieter voice. It simply whispers, "Begin again." The spider never knew whether the next climb would succeed. It climbed because standing still would never take it where it needed to go. Perhaps life asks the same of us. Not to guarantee success, only to take one more faithful step. For the path to tomorrow has never been built by those who never failed. It has always been built by those who refuse to let failure become their final chapter. Until next story. If today feels like your sixth fall, don't decide your future before you've taken your seventh climb. You may be far closer than you realize.